This is Continuum Drag, a weekly podcast where we watch sci-fi, fantasy, and everything in between.
This week, A Cold Night's Death.
Everything you said about me is true. I don't like this kind of work. I bloody hate it. It bores me and I get depressed. But I'm a professional, Frank. I don't play games.
Robert, those were careless things.
I know you. You can't stand a mystery, anything that can't be immediately explained.
But I don't understand why you continue to worry.
Because you know I didn't go near that heat last night. I wouldn't touch the generator, and I never would have opened that window.
Who did?
Welcome to Continuum Drag, the podcast that keeps you warm on those cold winter nights. I'm Luke, here with my co-host Jordan. What's real, Jordan?
We don't have any ability to keep people warm.
I mean, Jordan, if you think about it, this is coming out. It's the beginning of January, coldest month of the year. People can gather the family around the old hearth, put this on the radio, one of those big old timey radios, and they can all enjoy this together.
That is nice. That is nice. Just that crackling of the fire in the background. Lovely.
Yeah, the static of the radio as we come across the airwaves.
That's right. Wouldn't that be lovely?
Right after the Queen's speech for the Christmas message.
Never forget. Is Charles going to do that? This is January. Yeah, Charles did it. It was great.
I got to assume if he makes it, he's going to do it.
Yeah, he's got to do it. What if he's going to sit by that gold piano?
Do they have a gold piano? That's pretty swank.
Yeah, that's when you know you've made it.
They know how to live those royals.
That's right.
Well, this week we're watching the 1973 ABC TV movie, A Cold Night's Death.
Is this our best title we've ever seen?
It's a pretty solid title, eh?
And apparently the working title for the entire production was The Chill Factor, which isn't nearly as good. A Cold Night's Death is fantastic.
I did see that as an alternate title. I was just like, Chill Factor terrible, Cold Night's Death, you nailed it.
Yeah, and was I the only one humming Hard Day's Night by the Beatles?
No, is that your version of the theme song?
That's right. I was humming that the whole time.
Well, I don't know too much about it, and I tried to look into the movie a little bit. There's not a ton of information about it. It was starring Robert Culp. Culp? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, Robert Culp, he's a Continuum Drag alumni.
That's right. What was he in?
Spectre.
Still killing it here.
Yeah. Oh no, you know what I have to say. We'll go through this, and I'll just bury the lead right off the bat. I really like this movie. And I think one of the major benefits that this movie had was who they cast, and both Robert Culp and Eli Wallach are both great.
Yeah, it's just a two-hander, and the character actor Eli Wallach is also bringing his A game.
Yeah, and I mean, here's what you got to do: immediately they get a point for A Cold Night's Death, and then they get another point for having Eli Wallach and Robert Culp. So that's 2 points right there before we've even started.
Title and casting director, you both are getting points.
Yeah, you both get points. That's great.
Yeah, really, I could not find much written about this. All I really know is even just from the video itself that it was part of ABC's Tuesday Night Movies.
Yeah, you know what? I know it's a little antiquated now, and there's a reason this wouldn't be as popular now. But I think there's something really nice about like that. Just TV movies just came on. These, I don't know. I don't know why I find that more charming than just like Netflix or whatever. But there's something really nice about it.
This video what we watched had the full intro of the like 70s like neon ABC's Tuesday movie like flying at you, getting you ready to like settle in for the night.
Yeah, and you know what I like though is it has such a very different tone than what this movie is, and I loved it. So like, get ready, the excitement, Tuesday movie. They're like a slow simmering movie of these two guys in a place by themselves. We're like, oh okay, I'm glad I got jazzed for this.
Well, you know what's a nice coincidence for us, Jordan?
What's that?
This was broadcast January 30th, 1973. So this is essentially its 50th anniversary.
Wow. I know. I did the same thing you did, which is I looked up this movie and I saw a few people write about it, a few reviews, mostly people like ourselves who've rediscovered this later on. But there's not much out there, so I don't know how much of how much of a sort of a cultural impact this Tuesday movie had.
No, I mean, the YouTube comments do, I think, mention a bunch of people who probably watched it while it was on being terrified of it. But I did not seem to like have much writing about it or even like remembrance of it.
No.
But you know what we do know, Jordan?
What's that?
What happened in the world around January 30th, 1973, thanks to Wikipedia.
Yeah. I'd be really surprised, and I'm sure it's one of them. I'd be very well, I wouldn't be blown away. I'd be surprised if we hadn't watched a show during this time period.
Well, let me tell you this. So here's what was happening in the world while this was on TV, or close to being on TV. January 20th, 1973, Richard Nixon is sworn in for his second term.
Yeah, it goes well.
And January 22nd, 2 days later, former President Lyndon B. Johnson dies.
Oh, I didn't realize he had died that quickly after Nixon came in. He was like, I can't take another term.
I'm out of here. But to your earlier question, Jordan, in 1973, we've only watched two things, and they were two TV movies. One was in March, and one was in August.
Was one The Astronaut?
No, I'm afraid not.
Oh. What else would we watched in 1973? Oh, geez, I hope it wasn't Spectre.
It was not Spectre, I'm afraid.
Okay, that'd be funny if we watched two Robert Culp movies of the same year. What else would it be in 1973? The Astronaut thing? I don't know what we watched.
It was Genesis 2.
Oh, Genesis 2 was that early, huh?
And The Stranger.
Oh, The Stranger. You know what's funny? I said The Astronaut, but I was actually thinking The Stranger.
Oh, that is funny. I wondered when you said The Astronaut, I was like, maybe he means Genesis 2 or The Stranger. They both about astronauts.
The Stranger. Yeah, but that was a pretty good one too, wasn't it? I'm trying to remember now.
Not specifically. That was the one where there was the Earth on the other side of the sun, and the man lands on the wrong Earth.
Oh yeah, it was okay. Actually, it was okay.
Yeah, not as memorable as you might imagine.
That's right. Yeah, The Astronaut was the one where it was like a drama with the guy and his wife, right?
Yes, that's right. That was just the guy died on Mars, and they replaced him with another actor, and then they fell in love with the man's wife.
Yeah, no, that's a good TV movie right there too.
That's pretty good, actually.
Yeah, but that's not why you called. You called for a cold night's death. A cold night's death.
All right, well, let's get into it. Here's the IMDb summary for A Cold Night's Death. Two scientists suspect that there is someone other than their research primates inhabiting their polar station.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. But what we're going to get is this movie is interesting because, as you said before, it's a two-hander. So we're pretty much only going to see, for the most part, you're only going to see these two actors. There's going to be another guy near the beginning, but you're mostly going to get these two guys, and it sort of sets it up right off the beginning. And I at first I wasn't sure how I felt about it, but then I was pretty impressed with what this director and director of photography were able to do, because you sort of get this almost, like, dare I say, avant-garde beginning to this movie, where you have a little bit of like this camera quickly going over this icy terrain, and there's this very sparse and like electric odd rhythms happening, and then we see a little bit of light, and you're like, what is this? Is this the moon? Is it the sun? And you hear a crash, and we see that what we've been seeing is a bit of a window. And I just thought it was such an arresting early image, and I think how odd it was to start a movie and not even show any human characters. And they kind of do this for a little while, like the first 5 minutes or so before we introduce the characters. Even when we see them, they're from a distance. And I think it whether intended or not, I'm going to assume it was intended and give them the benefit of the doubt. I think it does a great job to create this sense of like this very vast, inhospitable area where it's just like a wasteland. Not a wasteland, but it's just snow. And I thought that was really good.
Yeah, you're out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, it's like it gives this wonderful sense of you're in the middle of nowhere and claustrophobic at the same time. And I thought it really set the stage right from the beginning with those shots and the music. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I really like the score over those sweeping tundra vistas they were shooting. It was really good. Mm-hmm. And the camera will arrive and show us the isolated Tower Mountain Research Station, which is buried in snow. It looks like it's the middle of winter. Storms have been blowing through. They did a great job. It all looks very cold. You can't help but feel cold.
Did you see that? I agree with you, that this research station is an actual research station, and they shot the exteriors there, which I was really impressed with.
Yeah, I saw that too, and I was just like, wow, so they really went all out to like kind of like it feels like it. It feels like you're there.
Yes, I agree. It's you said it's so cold and so inhospitable, and they do a really good job through this whole thing of you always having that feeling of, well, they can't get out.
Mm-hmm. And the first thing we see is we never see inside right away, but we see the outside of the research station, and we hear a character named Dr. Vogel futilely trying to reply to the project director of this research project, but he's unable to broadcast out. He's only able to receive. All he hears is the project director calling in, trying to get him on the radio, and this guy's just like desperate to get out, needs help, but we never see him. We just see the outside of the window, and we kind of hear him calling for help. And that transitions into sort of an expositional voiceover by this project director, where he kind of sets the stage for us, which is, very, very just tell not show. But I think it works all right, where the director essentially explains that he's running a space program or a space research program into stress situations, basically, that astronauts might encounter in space. They've been doing it for 4 years, and they've been doing these tests on monkeys up there under extreme conditions. This Dr. Fogel, they haven't been able to radio him in 5 days, and the last time they talked to him, he sounded pretty unhinged. He was talking about like having conversations with Napoleon and Alexander the Great, and my favorite part is the director sort of sets all this stuff up in a voiceover, and then he says, I'm particularly worried that he's jeopardizing the project and that he hasn't fed the monkeys. And I was just like, oh, so you're not worried about Dr. Vogel, you're just worried about the monkeys.
But I actually do like that, because I think there is there's an interesting kind of turn through this movie, but there is that idea that what's the most important, regardless of anything else, is this study. And I thought that was a good way of setting this up, being like, we just can't stop the study. Whatever happens, we just got to keep the study happening.
Oh, it sets the stakes really well, and I not that it's wrong for the director to like not care about the guy. It kind of sets the stage for like what kind of workplace they're going into. It's just very funny to me to be like, that research. I mean, that guy's going nuts. We got to get him out of there before he hurts those monkeys.
That's true. Let me just say one thing. You said it too, and I know you're just mimicking the movie, but they just say monkeys as a overall for any type of like primate.
Yes.
If there's like chimps or baboons or anything, they're just like monkeys. I was like, you guys are scientists, right? Everyone's a monkey.
It's funny. I think right at the start they kind of name what kind. There's like chimps up there. There's some ape. They kind of name what they are. And in my notes, I'm writing down everything they said. And then I'm like, I'm just gonna call them monkeys for the rest of my notes. And then I realized they're also. I was like, so the writer and me aren't unsympathetico. We're just like, call them monkeys. It's easier.
Yeah, it's easier because I didn't notice until I think it's early on. They have a chimpanzee, and I was like, that's not a monkey. I was like, is this just a mistake? Or like, no, it's easier. Everyone's a monkey.
Yeah. Early on, they're like, we got chimps, we got all kinds of stuff up there. It's like, let's call them monkeys, though. It's going to be easier and everything. Yeah. But because this Dr. Vogel seems to have lost his mind and they're right at the end stages of this research project, they need to get up there and sort of try to salvage it from him. And they brought in Dr. Robert Jones and Dr. Frank Inari to relieve Dr. Vogel. And they actually originated the research for the study's based on. So they're kind of bringing in the guys who came up with the theories that they're now testing, essentially.
Yeah, and one of the things that wasn't as well done as I would have liked is because they want to get right away to the challenges that these two gentlemen are going to have being at this station, is that I think it's just in one scene where the one guy, Frank Inari, played by Eli Wallach, just like says what the characters' personalities are. And I just thought it was funny. It was just like a line of dialogue. He's like, you're like this, and I'm like this. You're a little bit rock and roll, and I'm a little bit of country. And you're like, okay, well, I guess they're going to have some conflicts. Whereas I thought they had enough time to sort of show that. And they do a little bit, but it is funny that almost the first scene, you're going to get the thing that these are two research partners. I get the sense that maybe they're not really best of friends. They sort of like their colleagues. They work well together because of their somewhat different personalities, but they would never be people who would really spend any social time together.
Yeah, I mean, I know what you're saying, because what we'll see very quickly is a scene where Dr. Robert Jones, he's a little annoyed to be going out to this isolated research base to do this. Like, what he likes about their research is he likes the mystery, he likes the experimenting, and Dr. Inari, Frank, he's a guy who just likes the work. He likes to do the studying. He likes to do the observation. He just likes the numbers, basically, and which is why they probably work well together as researchers. But there is a thing where Robert Jones is sort of annoyed to be out there, and he kind of he's just like, I can't believe you picked up that call and you took this gig. Like, you know how I feel about this kind of stuff. It's kind of boring for me. I know you love it, but I don't. I don't know. I thought it was I agree. It really set up like a very baseline personalities, but I thought it was at least well enough to be like, here's all you need to know going forward. This is a little bit of a difference. And I thought for the most part, I was just like, could have been handled worse. And I think the actors probably helped too. Like, I felt like
I would agree. I wasn't that it was bad. It was just that it was funny the way that they just dumped it in some dialogue where I was like, well, we have all this time because they do this sort of running bit a few times that I thought was great as a way of showing Robert's personality. Robert, played by Robert Culp. And he plays pool throughout the movie, but what I always liked and I thought was an interesting character point was he's playing pool by himself. And there's this idea that I think it's a game that is meant for more than one, but he's going to figure things out by himself. And I just thought that was a better way of showing a personality trait than having someone just dump it in some dialogue, you know?
Yeah, no, fair enough. But I think to your point, too, it's like right at the start here, we kind of get this exposition about what the mission's going to be. We see the two doctors load in a helicopter. They get on, they bring a control chimp with them named Geronimo, which I guess is just to make sure the other chimps are still in this study process. He'll become more important later, but they have this chimp going with them. And they're essentially flown right out to the research station. And like no time's wasted. They kind of just want to establish like, here's where you're going. Here's these two characters. Let's just go in some ways.
Yeah, exactly. So they come, and there is a third character for the first couple scenes who's the helicopter pilot, this guy named Val Adams. But the three of them arrive at the research station, and it's lugged, and they really give the idea that where they are, there's a bad storm. So there's a kind of pocket where they can get through. They fly the helicopter. Val drops them off. He's with them for the very beginning before he flies out. We're going to find out he flies out with Vogel, is basically what happens.
I loved when they got off that helicopter and the snow's so deep, like it's waist high. They step off the helicopter and literally collapse into the snow. I was just like, this is pretty good attention to detail, actually.
Yeah, and I have to say, Robert Culp throughout this will be the actor who has to go out into the snow, and I think he does a great job. Every time he's out there, you feel the struggle of how difficult this is. He's the guy who's having to shovel and move stuff around. And there's a scene later on in the movie where he essentially gets like frozen or sort of hypothermia. And I thought he did such a great job of, honestly, I was watching it being like, give me a blanket. I'm so cold watching this guy. But yeah, they arrive. And as soon as they arrive, the station, they like open the door and they get in and it's like a mess. Like papers are everywhere. Furniture's pushed over. Like it looks like chaos has happened, you know?
Yeah, it's trashed in there. And the monkeys are still alive, but they're sort of freezing in their pens. So they're like, well, good, the monkeys are good, but they can't find Dr. Vogel. And they finally like work their way to the machine room. And when they get inside, this Dr. Vogel is just like frozen to death. Like he's just like covered in snow and ice. The window to the machine room has been left open and it's like covered in snow. The whole thing is like got this like white sheen over it. It looks like an icebox, basically.
Yeah, it's odd because I think he's stuck at his desk and he's got like the tape recorder in front of him, right? Like the microphone for what he's recording. Yes. So it looks like he sat down, opened a window, and not necessarily maybe commit suicide, but maybe had some sort of mental issue where things weren't firing properly, you know?
Yeah, he sat down. They say he ran 30 hours of reel-to-reel tape, so he recorded a couple podcasts while he was sitting there.
Yeah, that's right. And seemingly froze to death.
Yeah, and initially the doctors are like, well, he must have had a heart attack and just died there, and then like all this happened to him. But we'll see very quickly, like they'll take the body back and they'll call in with autopsy results, and it's just like, no, he didn't have a heart attack. He froze to death. He was sitting there freezing to death. And you know, this is particularly strange, they note, because like the door wasn't locked to the machine room, so it's not like he got locked in there. And he had his keys on him, so he could have just unlocked the door and left at any point. So there's a real mystery about like why or how he died. Like, had he gone that insane at that point?
Right. But they're able at this point to, I think they say the generator was still running, so lights were still on. There was a tiny bit of heat coming in from that, but they sort of put oil back into the heater and kind of get things back up and running. I think they even go through, which I thought was a well done scene, which is Val, this pilot. is kind of going through stuff, and he's not only dropping them off. It seems like he's like, here you go, guys. Here's how you do everything. Lights are here, water's here, and they basically show this like water cistern that has essentially uses snow from outside to go through their water filtration system to get melted into like a big cistern that then goes through the pipes, which becomes a bit of a plot device later on. But I thought that was well done to be like, to give you a sense of the geography of where they are. It's like, here's a room here, here's a room here, here's a room here. This is where you're going to spend the next hour and a half with these guys, viewers. I thought that was really well done.
Yeah, they do a nice little orientation with them, so you get the sense of it. And this sort of settles them in, and right as sort of this sort of opening ends, like this sort of like introduction to the world ends, we the audience, we're the only ones who are privy to this, but we get a quick ominous shot of the camera pushing in on the reel-to-reel tape player, and it's running audio from Dr. Vogel, whatever he was recording on those tapes, and he's talking about how whoever finds these tapes is never going to believe him. But that's the only time we'll ever encounter those tapes, because when they get back to base camp and try to listen to the tapes later, they'll let the doctors at the place know that when they thought out the tapes, they were completely blank, and they're just like, he must not have plugged in the recording device when he was running it, but he just ran 30 hours of blank tape. But we, the audience, know, like, we've heard a little bit of the tape and something strange happened.
Yeah, I have a couple notes here that are only somewhat related. One of my notes while we were at this point of the movie, I wrote, even these chimps are good actors, which I would agree. I think even the chimps were good. And my other note is, while I was watching this, I was like, this reminds me of something, but in a little different way. And Luke, do you remember when we watched Trapped in Space?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Same basic concept, isn't it? But for anyone who'd listened to that old podcast episode, very similar concept in the overarching structure, but in terms of how the story is told in a very, very different way. And I would argue that this is a much, much more effective movie.
Yeah, I mean, night and day as far as execution goes.
Yeah. Also, it helps having Eli Wallach. Come on now.
That's true. But this sort of, this is the setup. This sets us up here. We know how the doctors got here, what they need to do, the research, and then the geography of the station, and their basic personalities. We do a little time jump, and we see a few days have passed, as evidenced by they both have grown beards.
I love it. It's so funny because as this goes on, you'll be able to tell time just by their like straggly beards getting a little longer, which I don't know why they're not shaving, but it's just, I was fine with it. I'm like, at least I know time's passing. Great. It's a good shorthand. Good. I'm fine with it.
Well, I think a little bit of it is, and you've mentioned this too, like, I think Robert is bored, so his beard grows a little faster. We see him playing a lot of pool. Also, so funny, there's a pool table there of all the things, but sure, why not?
Yeah. I mean, we've said this before, but it's the number one thing that set deck seems to put in these TV shows, isn't it?
I think it's just so easy. It's like good business. You can see pool balls bouncing around, and it just,
yeah.
But yeah, it's so weird we keep seeing it.
Yeah.
And as we've mentioned, the assignment's dull for Robert, so he's kind of getting bored, and we see as he's going about his business, he's the one who, runs the water and does that stuff. We can see him mulling something over. There's a scene that I thought worked pretty well because it's pretty much silent. He's like checking on the cistern, making sure the water's running, and as he walks out, he stops by one of the doors and he starts looking at it, and he starts like playing with the lock and testing his keys in it, just seeing like if there's a way it could have jammed or something. And without saying anything, we get the sense he's just like, something about Dr. Vogel's death is like weighing on his mind.
Yeah, I agree. What was interesting is there's two things happening, and I think you paid more attention to that, and I paid more attention to the other thing, which maybe says a little bit about our personalities. But while Robert is checking these keys, not the keys, but the lock on the door, and he's already starting to think about, is there a mystery here that I can solve? Frank is like more at ease, and what he's doing is he's cleaning, he's cooking, he's trying to make a chart of what work duties they should have, and I thought that was, again, when this movie has its strengths, it's this sort of thing that you get to see what the characters are doing. And I thought it was funny that Frank just is like, okay, we're here to do a job. Let's get these stuff done. Let's organize it. Let's do it. And Robert just won't be pinned down.
Yeah. I thought that was really great too. It really establishes their working relationship. Like, you get the sense these guys work well together. One, because he's like big ideas. He chases theories, and the other because he's good at the research. But in addition to that, you get the idea that like, they've never really locked themselves in a place for a long period of time.
Exactly.
They're roommates now, and there's been an uncomfortableness around who does what, and like cooking. I think at one point they're splitting up chores, and he'll take the water shoveling duty, Robert. And when Dr. Anari, what's his first name?
Frank.
Frank's like, well, I'll cook. And Robert's like, well, if you cook, you should probably clean too.
Yeah. You make a good point, though. And it's something that, following up on what I said at the beginning of this, they might be good research partners, but there's no real indication that these two would like each other socially. And that is just exasperated through not only, you're saying, these small quarters, because we see later on, there are really roommates. There's one room and there's two like twin beds. And that's it. They're together all the time. So they work together, they live together, they sleep together, they eat together. And then on top of that, as we're going to see, stuff starts getting a little hinky, and it only makes those tensions greater.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, very quickly, Robert starts discussing with Frank his sort of, he's like, isn't it odd? I'm just keep mulling over Dr. Vogel's death. And he's just like, something just doesn't add up for him. And Frank's just like, dude, ignore it. Let's get to work. Like, he was an unhinged man. And, that's really that original setup of their character traits then like sort of deviates here, where one's kind of obsessing and the other one's just like, dude, we have to work. We have to get this research done.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's Robert basically is like, he doesn't think he had a heart attack. He's like, there's something here. And Frank's like, just leave it, man. Like, don't worry about it. Like, let's just keep going.
Yeah. And that night, Robert is woken by monkeys they're going nuts. They're going nuts down in their cages. The monkeys are going crazy.
Yeah. And didn't you think this scene was shot really, really well?
Oh, I think all of this thing was shot really well. You mentioned the camera work and the DOP. There's a scene later on when the two characters are really like falling apart. And it's a classic scene. We've seen it a million times, but I thought they executed it well, where the camera pulls back across the breakfast table and just shows the intense distance between the two characters at the breakfast table. Like, I think all the camera work here was so like specific and like intentional that like every shot feels like something.
Yeah, and I this is going to sound like a backhanded compliment, but it's almost as if the work that went into this was better than it should have been for a Tuesday night TV movie. Like, all these sort of interesting things, like the reason I'm bringing it up is this shot. It's Robert going to investigate, but for whatever reason, they focus so much on his feet and how he's walking, and I just thought it was such an interesting way of giving that feeling of sort of tiptoeing, and there's this nervous energy to it. I was like, this is like actually got style for a TV movie. Like, well done, guys.
Well, and there'll be a similar scene that happens later where he comes down when he hears the monkeys again a couple nights later, and they'll shoot it in a completely different way, but like juxtaposing the way we just saw. So there is a real intentionality, I think, that you're seeing, that you're commenting on for sure.
Yeah. So the scene though is Robert comes down. And he's investigating what this noise is. You do see all the monkeys, apes, chimps in their cages jumping up and down.
Something's got them agitated.
Yeah, he goes in and he goes into that room that Dr. Vogel was in, and he sees that the window's been open.
Yeah, the door was ajar, and he's like, that's odd. He doesn't say this, but he's like, that's odd, the door's ajar. And he gets in there, yeah, the window's open. It's much like how Dr. Vogel died. And as he's closing the window, the door sort of starts slowly closing behind him, and he's able to race and throw it back open. Yeah. And then when he looks out into the hallway, there's nobody there.
Yeah, and this is, I think this is the first real indication of like, this isn't just a person who, excuse the term, but kind of became unhinged. There might be a malevolent force at work here.
I mean, we really overlook the best part of him doing this investigation, though.
What's that? Oh, him in his pajamas?
Yeah, he doesn't put a shirt on for this investigation, so we get like a real topless Roger Culp for the whole time.
It is funny. He's wearing like what I would have wore as a kid for pajamas, just like long, tight pajama bottoms, and that's it. And I was like, yeah, go for it, Robert.
Yeah, I think they're kind of supposed to be like long johns because it's so cold, but I was like, but you got no top on.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, so he goes, and so he basically, this has only heightened his already suspicious mind that there's something up, and there's an interesting thing here where he goes back upstairs, and Frank is sleeping, and he goes, and I think the really point is he wants to talk to Frank about what he saw, and two, sort of check to see if maybe it was Frank that was closing the door, and so he's like, Frank, you awake? No, you're sleeping, and then he's like, no, he is asleep. So he goes back to the bed, and the camera pulls out to show that Frank is awake, and he's laying there with his eyes open. And you're like, oh, something funny's happening.
Yeah, you definitely get the sense there's something up here, because Frank is still awake, and he clearly doesn't want to answer him.
Yeah.
And when they wake up in the morning, they find that the power's gone out overnight. Like, they went to bed, the monkeys went crazy, he checked it out, and actually, as he's going back to bed, the monkeys calmed down as if whatever was happening sort of like simmered down. Yeah. And they all go back to bed, and that morning, power's out, they're worried about the pipes freezing, they're running around trying to get things going again, and the entire time I'm watching this, I'm imagining you at your country house waking up in the morning being like, my pipes, they're freezing!
It's funny you said that. I thought the same thing. I was like, I get it, guys. This sucks. It's like, if those pipe freeze, that's a day right there. I get it. So I thought that was not only an accurate representation, but I thought it also set the stakes of, it doesn't take very much to throw them into a dangerous situation. Like, as soon as they run out of water, they're screwed. As soon as they run out of heat, they're screwed. As soon as they run out of light, they're screwed. So there's this tenuous agreement with their electricity and their generator that they have to operate at all times. So little things like this are, very, very bad. And I think this is the first time where we get to see Frank really get irritated, because Robert now has woke up. He comes downstairs, and Frank's clearly been up for a little while trying to fix things, and he's clearly already frustrated. He's been doing it for a while, and it was clear to the audience, and I don't know if he actually says it out loud, but he basically thinks Robert got up in the middle of the night and was screwing around with things.
Yeah, I believe is sort of said out loud, in that Robert's just like, hey man, I heard you get up, or sorry, Frank, so I heard you get up and come downstairs last night, and it's just like, did you like happen to touch something? Like, I'm not blaming you, but like maybe you messed something up while you're down here. And Robert's like, no man, listen, you have to listen to me. Everything that happened to Dr. Vogel, like, it was kind of happening last night. And Frank's just like, I don't want to hear it, man. Just admit that you made a mistake when you came down here last night. And the two of them like can't, like, this is really sowing these sort of seeds of like dissension between the two of them, as just Robert just really like, something weird's here, someone's here, something's here. And Frank is just like, dude, just admit you made a mistake last night. Don't like go about it like this. Yeah. And so, you're right. This is the first like crack between these two guys. The one thing I do notice that Robert, the Robert Culp character, I know he's like the investigative guy. There's only so much stuff for him to look into, because as we'll find out, there's not that much plot. This is basically what's going to happen now. Is going to run over a few times where weird things are going to happen, and they're going to respond to it. But he does a lot of moping and not a lot of investigating. There's a lot of him kind of being like, I was like, well, go look at something, Robert. Well, I mean, I think to your point, this is what's sort of happening for Frank too, is he's getting very frustrated because he doesn't want to hear it. Yeah. He's just like not interested. And at some point, and the thing I liked about it is they're constantly, every time they fight, one or the other always tries to diffuse the situation afterward. There's an apology or there's some attempt to diffuse it. And as it goes on, one of the attempts to diffuse it is Frank sort of sits down at the breakfast table. He's like, hey, listen, I'm sorry we fought this morning. I know you're bored up here. He's like, I've been going over all the results of my tests on the monkeys. And he's like, I think there is a bit of a mystery in he doesn't say it quite like this, but he's like, there's something odd in the test. And he's like, why don't you look at them? He's trying to give Robert something to do, because he's just like, these tests we've been doing, it appears that the monkeys have developed I think he says, a stress immunity. Like, their behavior implies they're quite stressed, but their physiological signs don't show any of it. And he's like, it's quite odd. It's quite a mystery. And Robert sort of takes this. He's like reading through the results of the table, and as he's looking at them, he's like, all right, where are the blood tests? I need to like find the blood tests so we can see like maybe what's going on here. And when he says that, Frank immediately starts like hemming and hawing. He's just like, oh, well, we don't need blood tests. Like, I'm doing this with a different methodology. And Robert clues in, so he's just like, wait a minute, Frank, you don't have blood tests? He's like, have you even been in the machine room where that's where the blood test machines are? We could do it very easily here at the station. He's like, have you even been in there since we got here? Like, have you ever gone in there? And he's just like, no, I don't need them. And it becomes clear that like Frank is actually afraid to go in the machine room where Dr. Vogel died. Like, he's actually freaked out by something that he's not willing to like maybe even consciously admit to himself. And this sort of causes a bit more of a blow up, because Robert just what's wrong? Like, I've been talking about that room and how I'm suspicious of it. Now I'm finding out you are too. And like, Frank gets super upset by being confronted with the fact that he won't go in there, and he kind of storms off, and like another divide is put between them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, as happens with this a few times, I think right here we cut to like a few weeks later is what we're supposed to believe, or at least days later. I think it's weeks later, because I think their beards are quite a bit longer. And similar to the night before,
Robert's woken up. Monkeys are going crazy. He gets up in the middle of the night. My note was Robert gets up in the middle of the night, now with more beard. He gets up, but what's interesting this time is, as you said, it's a almost an opposite sort of shot of him going down to investigate. But as soon as he gets down there, he sees that Frank is up. Frank is up doing tests, which I thought was odd, because it's like the middle of the night, right? And he's doing a test.
He's got a monkey running on a treadmill.
On a treadmill, which is like, we should say, as a separate note, I don't know if the movie intended this as a theme through it, but immediately I felt bad for these animals. Not only the actual characters being tested on, but the let's say actor animals that still had to go through all these, because like it's this horrible thing of like, to get a monkey to like have to up and down and get freaked out in a cage. It's like it still has to be freaked out in a cage. It doesn't know what's happening, and there's like I did feel like there's a older style of dealing with animals than you see in movies now.
I mean, I think the movie is trying to show you how animal research takes place. Like, you see the cages being like, they pull the cages close so the monkeys are compressed inside of them so that you can jam a needle in them. You see them like opening monkeys' mouths and like prodding at their eyes so they can like do tests on them. And, you know, I think this is probably not even as extreme and like rough as actual research against some monkeys, but as you're watching it, you can't help but be like, but you're also actually doing the exact same thing to a real monkey right now. And it is like, I think if you have a lot of empathy towards animals, there's a lot that's hard to watch in this for that, because it is like, you're like, oh, you're commenting on animal research, but you're literally doing that to the animals to do the shots.
That hypocrisy stuck out to me too, and obviously that's it's very easy to make that criticism, 50 years later, but it is a little bit uncomfortable watching it. Even just like watching this poor chimp on a treadmill, I was like, oh guys, leave the poor guy alone. But basically, Frank sort of again implies to Robert that weird things are happening, and he thinks Robert is doing it, and he basically comes out. It's like, I'm getting tired of all this weirdness. It's been happening now for weeks. Why don't you just come out? And what was interesting is, to your point of there's always one of them going to diffuse the situation. Robert basically doesn't confirm or deny it. He just goes, why don't we do this? Let's go back to bed. We'll have breakfast in the morning. We'll have a nice little omelet. We'll make some coffee, have some French toast. We're going to sit down like two adults, two guys who like each other, and we'll just have a calm, rational conversation. And it does diffuse the situation immediately. I don't know if it's just because Frank loves breakfast, but they're just like, okay, agreed. That's great. Let's do that.
It is a nice scene because, this is the first time we see Frank really unhinged. Like, he's been up all night. He's been doing these studies. He's telling Robert, he's like, you don't think I haven't noticed? I haven't noticed that, like, all the tests run on the monkeys, like, seem to also be like, our food disappears at the right time. I walk in a room, the lights are on for some reason. He basically just like, Robert, I know you're gaslighting me. I don't know what the deal is or why you're running the experiments we're running on the monkeys on me, but I know you're doing it. He's just like, just tell me, Robert. Just tell me you're running the experiments. I won't be mad. Yeah. I'm a scientist. And, Robert's just like, well, that's not what's happening here, but I can see that you're starting to believe something's happening here. So you're right. And it's a great diffusion where he's just like, because, Frank's obviously exhausted. He's been up all night. He's like, let's go to bed. We'll sleep. It'll be and it's a nice diffusion of the scene. Like, I think that back and forth between those two characters really is smooth.
And the one thing I wanted to add, and I don't know if it was just me, but I assumed Frank was doing tests at night because he didn't want Robert to interfere. That's why he was actually doing the test at night. Did you get that sense?
I think that might be the case. I do think there's like such a divide between them at this point in the movie that it's just like they don't see each other, like they're sleeping in different rooms now, and that like Frank just can't, like, he just can't take it, and he didn't like that accusation earlier about him being afraid to go in the room, so like that's really divided them. So I think they are trying to keep separate hours maybe.
Yeah. And I do think that we should give credit where it's due to this movie for the effectiveness of slowly ratcheting up the tension between these two, and obviously the actors are very good, they do a good job, but if you think about it, again, very little's happening in terms of actual plot, and it's a lot of these characters having these conversations, and it's also happening weeks after, like weeks happen, and then a few weeks happen, and I think it could have been very easy to have lost that tension, but this movie, you just keep feeling it adding and adding, and you can actually feel these two guys getting put to the breaking point, and I think it's just the pacing and the music and the performances all just really clicked, and I think it really works well.
Well, I think that's what they do well is, there's not a lot of information. Like, they're isolated here, strange things are happening, but they don't get a lot more information beyond that. It's not like they're solving a ton of clues and like piecing the mystery together. There's just like character interactions, but no scene is wasted. Like, they're like, we're going to escalate.
That's a good way of saying it.
In the fewest possible lines, diffusion of how are we going to escalate from there. And it's always like, it's never boring. Like, they never overplay a scene. They never overstay a welcome. They never have more lines than they need. It's all very tightly woven.
Yeah, you'd almost assume this was like a play originally, the way it's the tightness to it and the efficiency that you're kind of talking about.
Mm-hmm. At any rate, so they go to bed so that Frank can get a good night's sleep and they can discuss it in the morning. When they come down to the kitchen that morning, it's trashed. Like, the kitchen is trashed. It's totally destroyed, and Frank is just freaking out because he's just like, Robert, I know you're doing this. Like, stop gaslighting me. Like, I know this is you. And as they're arguing, they hear a noise upstairs. And we haven't discussed this much, but they brought that control chimp with them, Geronimo. And when they get upstairs, Geronimo's on the pool table. He's hucking balls around. And one thing that sort of has been happening, like the B plot or the C plot that's been in the background, is Geronimo has kind of just a pet, basically, for Frank. Like, he's a control monkey. They don't really need him for the experiments. He's just there to be like monkey who's not been there for like 4 years. And as a result, Frank let him sort of run free. He's just like, I'm just going to let Geronimo wander around. He's essentially their pet. So they haven't been like locking him up at night. And when they see him trashing the thing and they realize, oh, he probably trashed the kitchen too. And Frank's just like, okay, I owe you an apology, Robert. I thought you were gaslighting me, but it's my fault. Like, I let this monkey run around and clearly I shouldn't have. He's been causing trouble. And Frank is basically like, I see now Geronimo is the culprit for all the strange going-ons. And I'm very sorry, Robert, for going insane and accusing you.
Yeah. And he puts him back in the cage. So from this point on, Geronimo's in a cage.
Exactly. Robert, however, he's still not quite convinced this is what's happening. Like, Robert has different theories. Robert knows something worse is going on, but he can't have this conversation anymore with a friend. Like, he kind of ends up in this sort of silent treatment mode. He kind of shuts down. He's just like, I don't know how to talk about this. Like, if you still can't believe what's happening, even now after the kitchen's trashed the next morning, he's like, I don't know how to explain to you. Like, that's kind of like, they don't say this, but that's what you sort of see in Robert's reaction to Frank. He's just like, you think it was Geronimo now. It's just like, I'm never going to be able to convince you something's wrong here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a solution, but doesn't seem to be a solution that checks all the boxes. So for Robert, he can't let it go. And
Robert, at one breakfast one morning, is sort of talking to Frank. He's just like, I still think something's wrong. He's just like, something happened with Dr. Vogel. And he's like, I don't know what it is, but I think there's a clue in the monkeys' names. I can't help but thinking the monkeys' names have some sort of, he just can't figure out what it is. It's sort of the seed that's planted here when they're at their kind of like most separated. He tells this to Frank, and Frank's just like, listen, we know it was Geronimo. That's sort of where they are. They're like, Robert's trying to crack the code and Frank can't. And they're sort of at this weird moment in time. And Robert ends up going outside to shovel snow into the like there's a hole or like a window into the, how would you describe it? There's like a window into the station.
Well, what's happened is, and I think it's a small little piece, is that when the water originally the pipes had a problem, they did actually burst. So what he has to do now is the actual mechanism of the water cistern doesn't work properly. So he has to go outside, shovel snow, and actually manually put it into the cistern to melt it. So right above the cistern is a window, but the window has it's almost more like a plastic window, like a slightly bendable,
it's like a
movable
tarp that comes down over top of it.
Yeah. So he basically, it's like this terrible job where he has to go out, shovel snow in the middle of what looks like the worst blizzard you've ever seen, and physically put it, a ton of snow into the cistern through this window.
And as he's sort of shoveling snow in, he's thinking to himself, and he's thinking, we're getting cuts inside of all the monkeys in their cages. And we've seen their names a million times. We've seen the monkeys in their cages throughout the episode or through the TV movie. And now we're getting quick shots of all their names in the cages, like Augie, Genji, Allie, Freddy. And suddenly he has this brainwave, and Robert realizes like what those names mean.
Yeah. He's sort of realized the connection to that they're short forms for names.
Yeah, he's like they're historic conquerors. He realizes he's like there's like Genghis Khan, Ali's Alexander the Great. There's like one called Julie that stands in for Julius Caesar. That's sort of like he has this realization, and he's just like, I gotta go tell Frank. I gotta go tell Frank. And he runs to the front door to get back in. And when he gets there, the door's been locked shut. He can't get back inside. He's sort of stuck outside. He's already freezing, and Frank is locked in. Doesn't know he's out there either. And inside, Frank, meanwhile, is like taking a shower. He's sort of starting his day. They've cleaned up the kitchen. And he goes into the ape research place to check on his pet monkey, Geronimo, just to make sure he's doing okay. Because they've locked him up in that cage as punishment for trashing the house as he thinks happened. And when he gets there, the cage is open. Geronimo's nowhere to be seen.
Yeah. So he starts looking around. He's looking for Geronimo. He finally comes up to this cupboard and he sees a little, I think it's just like a drip of blood coming out
and it's locked.
the corner.
The cabinet's locked from the outside.
Yeah. So he gets it open and he sees, and again, great performance by this chimp. He sees the chimp has been killed. What does it look like? It looks like it has been violently killed because it's bleeding. And he sort of takes it down, and you can see how upset he is that his little pet, his friend, has died. And it's actually pretty great because it not only works as a character moment for him, because you see this is what's going to put him over the top, but it also works as a great set piece of having him be busy. And there's a reason he doesn't hear Robert at the door, is because he's busy with much more important things. So it makes sense that he wouldn't even have heard. So you have Robert just pounding outside, getting colder and colder, and clearly the weather's so bad that you shouldn't be out there more than a couple minutes. He's now been out there who knows how long. We're going to guess like 20, 30 minutes. So he's really freezing, and you have these two characters having these two very different experiences, and I thought that was really well done.
Yeah, and Robert, he can't get in the front door, so he has to find another way in, and he ends up going back to the window to the tank where they dumps the snow into. In, like you said, in a scene that's just like very effectively played, he has to crawl through that window and falls directly into this like vat of freezing, like it looks so cold, the water he falls into, and he has to like fall in completely soaked, crawl out of it. And the makeup department does a great job. Like they have the water freeze on his face almost instantly. Like one of his eyes won't even open, it looks like, anymore. Like he looks like he's fallen into the water, climbed out, and frozen basically.
Yeah, and his performance is great. He looks like someone who's had hypothermia. You feel it as a viewer. And he basically, there's a scene of him like, I'm going to say trudging through the hallway to kind of find Frank, and he can barely speak. He can barely move. He's just shuffling so slowly. And I thought, I mean, kudos. What a great performance. And you really feel it. And he basically is just trying to make it to Frank to survive himself. And not only that, but clearly he wants to, say, why did you lock me out there? And it's yeah, I thought it was great. That was all told just in his like trudging through the hallway.
Yeah, it's amazing. And he gets to the kitchen and finds Frank standing over the body of the chimpanzee. And Frank's now got a gun. And we didn't talk about this much, but when they first arrived, the pilot showed up with a small gun when they were searching the house where the Dr. Vogel was violent or something, but he left that gun behind. Frank has it now. He has it pointed at Robert, and he's accusing Robert of killing his monkey, essentially. And he thinks basically that Robert's become unhinged as Dr. Vogel has been, and he's just like, Robert, I want you to lock yourself in the machine room. We're going to get help as soon as they can fly a helicopter in here, but I can't trust you. I need you to lock yourself away inside the machine room where I'm safe from you and you're safe from me, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we get a scene where it's not entirely clear in terms of the blocking, but it looks like, and maybe we disagree, Robert basically is coming towards Frank to have this conversation. I don't think he was actually physically trying to grab him. I think he's just is so cold and he's so immobile that he's kind of shuffling towards him. Frank sort of takes it as an aggressive stance, and they have almost like a little bit of a wrestling kind of thing. Like they kind of grab each other, and in this embrace, the gun goes off and Robert shot in the stomach and killed.
Well, and I think to your point, it's not exactly, I think what it is basically Frank is just like, I think we should lock you up. I think you've become unwell. I think something's wrong. And Robert just come back in because he's figured something out. He thinks he knows what's been happening now. And so as they get closer together, it's because Robert's kind of trying to he's freezing, he's dying of the cold, and he's trying to explain desperately to Frank that here's basically the summary of his explanation is just like each test they've run on the monkey, as we've seen with them reporting, like writing down, like they'll be talking about their results out loud, or that even when Frank accused Robert of running tests on him, that every test they've run, like depriving the monkeys of food, their food disappears. You subject the monkeys to a fear stimulus, same in the way we've been getting afraid. When we isolate the monkeys, we've become more isolated. Everything that's been happening, he's like, it happened to Vogel too. And he's like, don't you remember what the project director told us? When Vogel was going crazy, he said he was talking to Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great. Those are the monkeys' names. He's been talking to the monkeys. He's trying to tell them that the monkeys are doing this to us. Like, that's what's happening. These test monkeys aren't just test monkeys anymore. Something's changed in them.
At this point, I have a note. And I was like, who wrote this? Michael Crichton?
But you're right. He says all this. Frank is so freaked out by him as he gets closer. Frank shoots and kills him. And, Frank is just obviously distraught, having killed his partner, standing over his body. And as he's standing over sort of this crime scene, essentially, Frank hears a tape recorder go off inside the machine room. And it's a recording of an earlier conversation him and Robert were having. And he kind of goes into the machine room and finds a tape recorder running, and he notices the window outside once more has been opened up, and he turns and the door shuts behind him and locks, and the camera pushes up on the window into the station so you can see who's locked the door. Mm-hmm. And standing back there is one of the monkeys from the research station has locked him in to die, just like Dr. Vogel.
Yeah, and that's the end of the movie. Now, I'm going to mention something really quickly. I read a few reviews of it, and I read one person who hated this ending, and they said it was so good till the end. It's so implausible and all this. And I couldn't have disagreed more. I thought it was a great ending. I thought it was great. I thought within the universe they created, it's absolutely plausible, and it's a moral tale. It's the theme they're trying to tell. It's like, yes, you can go through and go, wait a minute, do their opposable fingers work in exactly the same way as humans? Like, who cares? That's not the point. The point is that all the little pieces were set up in this very slowly and very effectively. And when you look back, you go, this all makes sense. And they should have seen what was happening earlier. I thought it was really great because you as a viewer are on this journey the same time as Robert is, and you don't figure it out before he does.
No, for sure. And I mean, I understand kind of where that viewer probably is coming from with his complaint. And part of me was sitting there being like, would there have been something that would have been more satisfying? Did I need more exposition around why the monkeys had changed, or if they had become smarter, or if this was just natural? And then I was just like, I don't actually need any of that. It doesn't matter. That would just be extra information and dialogue, but it doesn't change the outcome. It's still the same outcome. And I think it is only worse by trying to explain why.
Yeah. I mean, and I still think that look,
it's
this idea
enough.
that the apes or monkeys or chimps have turned on the scientists because of their mistreatment of them. That's an interesting idea, and it was realized really well in this. And I thought the ending just sort of punctuated that humanity's basic treatment of the planet and the creatures on this planet has a cost, and the cost may not be so obvious right away. And for these guys, unfortunately, it came to them too late. And I thought, well done, movie.
Yeah. I agree. I think that was my final decision on it too. I'm just I think the ending, it works just absolutely perfectly the way it is.
You know what? I would have agreed if we saw the two chimps give each other a high five and then skateboard off or something like that. But it's not like that. It's just ominous. You don't get even a sense that how much more of an understanding the animals are having. It's almost like nature is telling them to respond. I thought it was really well done.
Well, do you have any final notes, or should we just rate it?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say that this clearly had a small budget and a small cast, but I think you said it before. It's the efficiency they have in not wasting scenes and not, for the most part, not wasting any dialogue is great. And you do get the sense that Frank is sort of erratic the whole movie, and Robert's a little aloof. And you get these mismatched personalities, and it's not too over the top, and it's not too little. And I just thought it worked really well for the tension of this movie. And I really enjoyed it.
That's great. Me too. Me too. Well, I'll start by rating, I guess. Why don't I get us going? I mean, let me tell you this. I love like a frozen cold isolation movie. Like, obviously The Thing is the gold star. This thing hit all the notes right off the top that I'm just like, oh, this movie is already for me. I'm enjoying exactly how it's going. But then, as you said, the two-hander, how tightly paced it was. Everything sort of worked. Great character actors. It was such a slow burn. Everything was believable, like interaction-wise between the characters. Jordan, I don't know if I've seen a better TV movie for this podcast.
I haven't either. I thought the exact thing. This is the best TV movie we've ever seen.
This is a straight 10, man.
Yeah, that's great. I'm not gonna go straight 10, but it might be my highest ever. I'm gonna give it an 8.5. 8.5. I just can't go. You know what? It's so close. It's so close to being like a 9 or a 10. I just think it's not quite there. But I really enjoyed it. 8.5, man.
I can't imagine what we're ever going to see that's going to be better than this.
Oh, I know. You're probably right. I'll probably never get past this. But honestly, it's one of my favorite things we've ever seen.
No, it was truly, I was just like, this is kind of a classic film that no one has seen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really good. Like, again, the only thing that sort of holds us back in terms of like something you would have seen at the cinema is you can see it's got a TV budget.
Yeah, it's a TV movie for sure.
Yeah, it's a TV movie, but man, did everyone, like the stars aligned for everyone making this thing.
Everybody understood the assignment, they understand the parameters they were working in, and they didn't let any of that hold them back.
You know what? I'm changing it. 9 out of 10, Luke.
Oh, there we go.
Up to a 9
out of 10.
I'm going up to a 9. You're right. Absolutely right. I'm being too hard. It's a 9 out of 10.
I mean, I think that is the thing, is we've watched a lot of TV movies now, and like I think maybe that's why TV movies have died off, is that when you need to produce a lot of them in a short period of time, you just are really going to get a mixed bag. But like watching this is the moment where it's like, oh yeah, you can still work within this and like crush it. It's just hard to do probably, but man, did these guys crush it.
Yeah, and we've seen, I think, in some other TV movies, like points that are really well done, like, it's being cast well, or the part of the movie is really well performed, or whatever it might be. But this thing, I tell you, top to bottom, just it was really good. Absolutely. I really enjoyed it. I tell you, I've said this before. Sometimes it's a slog watching through these things, and you feel, I'm sure, the same way too. Like, Rocket Boy. But watching this, I was like, great, I could do this every week, no problem.
Yeah, I couldn't even watch it all in one sitting because I was just busy, but I was so excited to sit back down and watch more. Every time I'm just like, oh, I got to get back and watch more. I want to see what happened.
Yeah, it was great. Well, look at that. Average between us is a 9.5 out of 10.
Certainly the best rating we've ever given anything, I'm sure.
Agreed. A Cold Night's Death. Check it out.
Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. So as we've been doing this year, we have bonus episodes for charity happening where you, the listener, can donate to one of a select group of charities that have been chosen by our former guests. We're recommending a $50 donation, but give what you can is the model we're working with. So if that's too much for your means, no worries. You can donate less. There are details on our website, continuumdrag.podbean.com, on how to donate, how to pick an episode. Also, you can find that link on social media. The essential idea is any series that we've taken the escape pod from and not watched all the episodes, you can pick an episode we missed, force us to go back and watch it. Maybe you love that episode and you think we'll enjoy it too. Maybe you just like to punish us by making us watch something we hated. I don't know. It's up to you. You're the sadist.
Don't punish us. Make us watch A Cold Night's Death again.
Everyone just keep watching it over and over and over again.
Every week we do another review of A Cold Night's Death.
And of course, you can always email us at continuumdrag@gmail.com. Let us know how you're doing. Are you keeping warm this winter? We hope so.
Yeah, don't be like Robert. Don't be out there shoveling snow into your cistern.
Yeah, don't shovel snow into your cistern, then crawl into your cistern full of water, and then crawl out of that cistern freezing to death.
Yeah, don't freeze your eyelids shut. That's not a good idea.
I mean, this is how you will die on your country house, right?
Oh, there's been a few times, because I'm we don't have to get it. I'm kind of in the middle of nowhere, and there's been a couple times where something has happened, and I'm like, oh man, is this how people are gonna find me? This is not good.
Real Dr. Vogel moment.
Yeah.
And of course on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Continuum Drags the handle there. We'll have some clips from Cold Night's Death. Snow stuff, lots of snow stuff.
Yeah, you'll feel cold.
You will feel cold, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But that wraps it up. So listener, thanks for joining us, and Jordan, see you next week.
See you then.
Continuum Drag is recorded in Toronto, Ontario, and Seoul, South Korea. Theme music by James Rick Seidler. Produced by Jordan Delick and Luke Black. Special thanks to Aaron Yunes.